How's it going, everybody? Welcome to LUMIX Live this week. As the title says, this is our wrap-up for 2025. Given that we've got Christmas next week, and then we've got New Year's the following week, this is unfortunately the last one that we're going to be doing live for 2025. We've got, a lot that we have talked about, that we've announced, that we've kind of had chats about over this entire year. And I wanted to kind of just I don't know, I guess maybe just take it a little easier on the last stream of the year. Hang out, ask questions. Like always, I've got the camera hooked up so we can demo some stuff too. And I already see a bunch of questions that have come in that we can definitely talk about and kind of give some clarity on differences and how certain things work in a number of our cameras. But yeah, wanted to just kind of, like I said, hang out, relax, and just chat with everybody and kind of go through it that way. Before I jump into that part of it, I want to remind those of you in the United States about LUMIX Pro service. We have Red and Platinum tier available here in the US. The Red tier is free if you've purchased a new LUMIX camera or you are planning to get your last-minute orders in for the holidays or by the end of the calendar year. You will have access to LUMIX Pro Service Red. You follow the QR code right below me, right to the page to get yourself registered and all that kind of fun stuff. But if you're someone who prefers having a much higher level of service and support, you can obviously upgrade to the paid tier, which is our platinum level service. That gets you all the same benefits as the red tier, which is the 3-year extended manufacturer warranty. But on top of that, you're going to get 2-day repairs, next day shipping both ways, 20% off out of warranty repairs. You get access to our membership hotline if you prefer to speak to someone. So that's Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. You get an exclusive welcome gift, but also you get some, kind of next level service and support. So if you want to send your camera, lenses, and stuff like that in for sensor cleanings, firmware updates, calibrations, like all that kind of stuff, you have access when you're in the platinum tier. So I encourage you, if you have purchased a new LUMIX camera or you are planning to purchase one, make sure to get yourself registered down below and protect that purchase that you've got. With that, let's kind of just run through and see what kind of questions people had. Like I said, I really didn't have any kind of specific plan for this week's stream, just kind of a chat and hangout. So the first stuff, I forgot to mention, as always, if you have a question you want me to directly answer, and bring it to my attention, make sure to tag at LUMIX USA, as you can see some others are doing in the chat. Just makes it a little bit easier for me to see them. I'll try to get to even the ones that don't have the at LUMIX USA, but it's much easier if I see that. One of the questions that came up was, can double exposure please come to the S5 Mark II and the S9 series? S5 had it, and the S1 and the new S1 series has it. It's nice to use for some glow photos or just being creative. Yeah, so the newer iterations of the cameras, so the S1II series, we were able to get multi-exposure back in those cameras. I don't know what the status is of something like that coming to the S5IIs. To be honest, the S5IIs they're not old cameras, but in certain cases it's a matter of one, what changes have happened hardware-wise between the S5 Mark IIs and the S1 Mark IIs. When we first made the transition over to the new engine, so the L² engine, dual exposure, multi-exposure wasn't something that was able to be done at the time of launch. So it took a lot of time to basically take what it is that we had created and how it worked in the previous generation processors and be able to adapt it into the new engine. Like we said, when we made the announcement with those cameras, it's a totally new architecture. So it's a completely different way of doing things from the previous generation. It doesn't mean that I can say 100% that the S5II series or the S9 would never get it. It's less likely to come in. That being said, Something like live composite could be an alternative, depending on it really more for the creative side. Since like if you want to use multi-exposure for something like, say, flash photography, where you want to do multiple things in the frame, yeah, it would work fine for that because you're constantly running the frames, and you could do it, even for light painting. But it is something that I'll continue to push the engineering team with, if that's something that the S5II series was capable of, if it's something that's on a plan to be done, or if it's something that just unfortunately wouldn't be done, I'll keep pushing regardless for everybody. FC says, I know you went over how to expose camera in Vlog, but I can't find which LUMIX Live episode you explained how to use it. Do I overexpose Vlog 1 to 2 stops? So there's different mindsets when it comes to exposing for log. If we start at the base level, there is what I would call more of the controlled studio or the film way to expose for log. And that is, you set your midtones to 42 IRE on a waveform, if you have the tools to measure that, or if you're using something like Luminance Spot Meter, and then you light your scene for how much dynamic range you want in there, knowing that you have, depending on the camera and the mode, you have anywhere between 5 to 6 stops over that middle gray that you could work with. That method works great when you have all the control in the world. You've got the ability to light a scene, and it's not run and gun. Fully acknowledge that. That's where I'd say the kind of like second part, or the alternative way that a lot of people will expose for log profiles, especially for something like Vlog, and that is shooting to protect your highlights. That is basically shooting as bright as you can to where your highlights don't clip, and then in software you bring your exposures back, you bring everything back into an alignment. This has a couple of different benefits when you shoot this way. One is obviously you're exposing your shadows much brighter. So if you had to bring your shadows up in post, you're not going to introduce as much noise. You're filling the lower end of the spectrum with more exposure. That will relate when you bring your kind of exposures back into where you kind of want them, protecting your highlights, putting your shadows back down to where they should be. That typically results in a cleaner looking shadow region within your image, which some people prefer. Some people would rather shoot that way. You do want to keep in mind, though, that you are shifting your midtones very high. So when you bring them back, you do run a risk of having some tonal shifts as you bring those midtones back to midtones, so like where you want your skin tones to be. But if you go into exposing knowing that these are some of the trade-offs with it, it could work for you. There are others that have some good examples and explanations of what happens when you heavily overexpose and bring things back, as far as the way certain details are rendered, making sure that you're not clipping any of the color channels, not just paying attention to luminance, and just kind of being comfortable with how the camera works for you. So I set up my S1R2 here to kind of give you an example of how I would recommend setting it up. So for one, I'm using this just as my bright point on here. And I am having to really shift how I'm using the camera right now. So I'm in manual focus. I'm in 8.1K on this. I'm on dynamic range expansion, which gives me the maximum amount of dynamic range available. And I'm shooting at a very slow shutter speed. So I'm shooting at 1/6 of a second. So you can see that I've got that, excuse me, I've got that blurry effect to the frame. So if you've ever wanted to know, one, how to do this, how to capture video with that kind of like ultra blurry look to the frame rate, or to get your frame rate below what your or get your shutter speed below what your frame rate is, you have to put the camera into manual focus to do this. Part of that's because focus algorithms require the ability to be matching the frame rates. So in this particular case, as you can see, I've got it pretty far down. And we're going to go back to 6 here. But you'll also notice that I have Luminance Spot Meter enabled. Luminance Spot Meter is our tool in the camera that allows us to pick a point in the image to kind of figure out what that exposure value is. When you're in log, it's going to show you based on a stops scale. If I'm not in log, if I'm in a 709 based profile, or if I'm in one of the photo based profiles, it'll show you a percentage. Effectively, if you're in a studio environment, you can take this particular spot, you can put it over a gray card, and make sure that your stop value that shows up on the bottom there reads 00. Then you light your scene with how bright you want your highlights, how dark you want your shadows, and you're good to go. If you want to use the overexposure method, what you can do with this, so you can see right now I'm 0.5 to 0.8 stops overexposed. In this particular setup, if I go into my ISOs and I start raising my ISOs, you'll see that my stop values are increasing. What you would do is understand that log has headroom in our cameras, and the values will stop, like gaining, when you're at the point where you are clipping one of your channels, whether it's, red, green, or blue. So I can run this up on the S1R Mark II. I can run this up to 6 stops over middle gray. Realistically, I don't recommend doing that. I recommend hey, if I know that I've got 6, or I know that I've got 5.5, or I know that I only have 5, because you can see this when you use your camera. It'll only go up so high for your upper values. Find where the wall is, and then I usually back down maybe half a stop, sometimes maybe a full stop. I usually don't want to pin it up against that number. You want to have a little bit of flexibility above it, because you don't want to be accidentally clipping one of your color channels. Now, this will get a little screwy depending on what kind of tools you're using, because if you use waveform, one, you can only use the waveform on our cameras in the camera. So you have to remember that, you're going to be pushing everything way up. Your corrective LUTs, so I have the basic 709 LUT turned on in here. When I turn that on, obviously this is not how I would want this image to look for my viewing. So if I'm going to be loading in a monitoring LUT, something to help me kind of understand how my exposure is going to be, I'm going to have to create one based on what my overexposure tendencies tend to be. So in this particular case, if I'm up 5.6 stops, I would record a clip in log. I would then do my color correction, do my exposure correction, everything, bring it to the way I want it to look, and then I would export out a LUT from that edit that works within these parameters. So the caveat being is that if I am exposing for 42 IRE as middle gray, that LUT that I generate is going to make everything look really dark, because you're using a LUT that's created to bring exposure down. So you want to keep some of those different pieces in mind. This is one way to do it. It allows you to be able to shoot as bright as possible, keep as clean of a shadow region as you can. Sometimes it means you're going to be shooting at higher ISOs. Keep in mind your dual native ranges, or whatever operating mode you have the camera in, what the native ISO is. But this kind of logic will also work in places where you're kind of following the traditional rules, where, in this case, I'm at 24 frame. Realistically, I should have my shutter set to 1/48th. In this case, just because I have it still set on shutter speed, it's 1/50th. It's just one of the other tools that I have available. So that's FC. That's probably the best way I can describe it. Does it mean that one way is better than the other? Not necessarily. I think it more depends on the situation and what it is you're trying to shoot, or just understanding that when you shoot in log, you're gonna have a lot more headroom to work with for exposure. You can shoot brighter if you're in a really dark environment and you're not really having to push your ISOs that high. say you're working on an S5 Mark II, right? You've got 640 and 4000 ISO. Say you meter the room, you've got everything set up, and your ISO is being set to like 2000 ISO. Well, you know, if you're shooting in Vlog, you can just bump straight to 4000 because you're going to have enough headroom as long as you're not blowing out all your highlights, or you're selectively, where you want your highlight to be overexposed. You have the room to do that and take benefit of the fact that you can jump to the new circuit. You can get better shadow noise anyway, because now you're going to be lifting and providing more sensitivity into those shadows. And you're still going to be able to protect your highlights. It is one way to work. Just be aware of what happens, or the potential of what can happen to midtones and skin tones as you bring them back, versus the situations where you can just properly expose, which is that, again, middle gray or 18% gray should be set to 42 IRE or 0.0 on the luminance spot meter tool here. As a follow-up to that question, because it was asked a couple questions later, was about being able to toggle luminance spot meter to your focus box. The reason that's not done, and actually the reason you wouldn't want to necessarily do that, is that depending on the scene and the environment, if you're shooting in a way where you're trying to maximize what your highlight range is, if luminance spot meter was tied to your focus, now you'd have to put your focus box into the sky to get the metering there. Obviously, that would defeat the purpose of where you would potentially want your focus to be. So they are kept separate because they are doing two very different things. So I confidently say that's not something that we're going to change. I don't think luminance spot meter will ever be tied to the autofocus points. It's just not, I would say, one of the pressing things that has ever been asked for. If anything, we get more requests of people wanting to make sure that certain features are not tied to things like autofocus or particular options in the camera. This way you have the flexibility to put them wherever you want. Now in the photo mode, you do have some options. Some cameras have had this where you can have your spot meter tied to your focus point. It's used a little bit more primarily, I'd say, in portrait photography, things where you're trying to, especially if you're working with flash, I want to be able to control the entire environment. I don't care what the rest of the environment looks like. I only care what that one particular point looks like, because I'm trying to create shadows and highlights and different looks. But in the video side, it's just not one of those things that's ever really kind of been seen as a need for it. Next question was, is there a way to have handle a remote trigger but wireless? I know there are handles with cables, cable connections to the remote port, but it would be superb to have it wireless. So there are some companies that do make wireless triggers for cameras that are basically handled by Bluetooth. They typically plug into the remote port on the cameras. You do have to be careful with some of them because they have to make sure that they're wired correctly to trigger what you want them to trigger. I've seen some companies that claim they have, support for our cameras, but when you use it, like say in the photo side, it only triggers video, or if you're trying to trigger video, it only triggers photo because they built the things wrong. Or didn't actually do any tests to determine oh yeah, no, these do work with Lumix cameras. They kind of just, slap a thing on there that says that they work with it and they sell them to you. So there are some options out there. The other option is, and I know I've said this a couple of times, LUMIX Lab does have remote control functionality. So you do have the ability that when you have the camera connected via Bluetooth, to your mobile device, that you have a video start stop and a stills capture, as well as a timer capture for stills. So you do have options out of the box right now with the Lumix cameras, and that was the same even with the Lumix Sync app. So if you've got cameras that aren't compatible with Lab, the Lumix Sync app, and I think even in the the image app, the original one, I think they all had some ability to do that. Yeah. Is it easier to correct white balance in post using vlog as opposed to natural or standard profile video? If so, can I be lazy, quote unquote lazy, and not worry about white balance in camera when shooting in vlog? No. It is not necessarily easier or harder to correct white balance in natural or standard. Part of the well, take that back a little bit. I'd say it's a little bit easier to correct it in vlog. Because you are working with typically, well, not even typically, it's not like there's not as much contrast baked into it. It's not as close to the final look as, you know, standard or natural would be. Remember that standard and natural profiles are much more, you know, kind of akin to like straight out of the camera use. You're really not meant to be editing them. I know people do because you like them as a good base. Nothing wrong with it. Just understanding that they're not really designed for that. So your white balance changes are going to be very difficult in those particular cases. Now, vlog, the reason it's a little bit of a catch answer with vlog is that it depends on what you're shooting in. 10-bit, 420 or 422, regardless, are going to be relatively difficult to correct swings in white balance. Colors will fall apart if you have to make relatively dramatic changes. This is why Video RAW is a pretty potent tool. Video RAW gives you much more control over correcting things like white balance, tint, hue, saturation, being able to adjust the colors. Does that mean that you can be quote-unquote lazy with setting white balance? No. I think even in RAW shooting, do not get in the habit of not setting white balance. It may work, like if you take 10 particular shoots and you didn't care about white balance, 9 of them turn out fine, but you're gonna have that one that it's unfixable. And typically in cases like that, the only solution is to flip it to monochrome. People are less likely to see issues in monochrome, at least in the photography side. That's one of the tricks. Same with like high ISO. If I have to shoot really high ISO, I'll just add a bunch of grain. You know, whether it's digital grain for photos or digital grain for video, you can hide shooting at higher ISOs by adding a film-like grain to the image. So in general, yeah, don't try to cut corners with white balance or try to make things a little bit easier by not having to worry about setting white balance. Always do some sort of balancing check. Gray cards are relatively inexpensive. In general, if you've never known this about Lumix cameras, when you go into our cameras, if you hit the white balance icon and you go to the custom sets here, when you press up, you can just put your gray card in the box so that the gray card covers the box here. Press the menu set button again, and that'll set the white balance based on that particular gray card. Obviously, my hand is not gray, so it's going to shift those colors. So it's designed to be a very easy way to set white balance on the fly, because you can constantly go in and keep changing this between different shots to just make sure that you're very close. One of the more important things is to make sure that you actually get yourself close to the white balance that you need. Like right in my office, I run my the Zhiyun light that I have up here that's down in the description. I use that and I have it set at 6500 Kelvin. So I know that that's my primary light. I have blue and red accent lights that are going to add, you know, blue and red into the frame. But I know that my dominant light is 6500. So I'm trying to base what I want to show for my camera through that. So what you see on the screen is actually pretty close, minus exposure, to what it actually looks like sitting on the table. So, is there an option to change picture profiles in the Flow app while connecting the phone as an external monitor via Wi-Fi? I am unable to change picture profiles while self-recording. So yeah, things like picture profile, recording mode, those things, if you're using Flow, are not able to be changed in the app. However, if you use LUMIX Lab, you have the ability to control some of those things. You'll get a lower resolution video feed, but you do get control over white balance. You can change picture profiles, like all those things. You can start and stop. You can select the video recording options that you want. So LUMIX Lab has those functions because Lab is designed to be a companion tool for capturing photos and videos. Flow is designed as a production or a workflow and a monitoring tool, not necessarily designed as a I need to be able to control everything in this app. Keeping that in mind, that's why we have different apps. They are designed for different purposes without the overhead of a lot of the other stuff, which can cause kind of feature bloat in an app, slow things down, maybe overcomplicate certain things. So they are kept designed right now to be a little more specialized. So what you're describing, I would probably recommend using LUMIX Lab instead of Flow. Works wirelessly, connects the same way that Flow does, but it gives you more control over certain settings in the camera. Happy holidays, Rhett. Good to see you all here. Chris says, what's the difference between 4.3 and 3.2 open gate in the S1II? Why use one over the other? Does 4.3 cop the sensor at all? Is it slower rolling shutter? This is a great question. So, with the S1 Mark II, you have two different aspect ratios that utilize the full sensor height of the camera. Open gate 3x2, which is the full sensor height and width, so that means that you're not losing any height, you're not losing any width, you get the full sensor height in a video resolution. That's what you would typically consider open gate. Remember, open gate it's not defined by resolution, it's not really even defined by sensor size, it's designed by this is the sensor that I am recording with no masking to get to a final resolution. So in full frame's case, it's 3x2. The S1 Mark II, though, does add a 4x3 full sensor height option. This means that you do clip out the sides to get the 4x3 aspect ratio, but you're getting the full height of the sensor. Now, where is this beneficial over 3x2 or vice versa? Well, a lot of that can come down into, in some cases, what types of anamorphic lenses you want to use. 4:3 aspect ratios de-squeeze differently than a 3x2 ratio, depending on the lens that you put in front of it. You see a lot of 1.33 anamorphic lenses were kind of designed around a 16:9 sensor, so you get the typical cinemascope-ish output. But then you can also go to things like the 1.6 anamorphics, where you can put those on different sensors in a 3x2, and I believe on a 3x2 you get a 2.0 aspect ratio. 1.33s get you the... Or is it 1.33s get me the... Because I'm using a 1.33 now. Basics of it, you get different aspect ratios for the outputs depending on the anamorphic lenses that you're using. The other benefit is that some people just prefer capturing in the 4x3 ratio because of those different squeezes. It doesn't get you any more height than 3x2 open gate does. It does not change readout speed. Readout speed is governed by the height of the sensor, not by the width or technically the resolution. Technically meaning it depends on whether or not the camera's downsampling resolution from full image area or not. Typically, if a camera is downsampling from, say, in the S1R2, say we're downsampling from 8K, like full-blown downsampling, usually you don't see rolling shutter differences between the full sensor with readout in 16:9 and then a lower resolution 16:9 if they're downsampled, because the camera still has to read the full-blown resolution first to then downsample it. Cropping into sensor can reduce rolling shutter. That's why a lot of times you'll see in any spec list or any kind of truncated rolling shutter figures that a lot of outlets like to do these days, which I think is a little bit misleading. They'll quote cameras that have a 4-point-something millisecond readout speed and it's super fast. Well, it's also not clearly telling people One, it's typically in 4K 120, usually, or Full HD 240. They're usually having to either come from a cropped region of the sensor, or they are imposing some sort of line skipping or binning to get to those figures. Those are all things that will affect what rolling shutter or readout speed will do. It all depends on how the image is processed. So if you're using something like an S1 Mark II and you look at 3x2 open gate and you're fine with the rolling shutter that you have, you'll like the look, but you're working with anamorphic lenses, 4x3 is just going to give you a different aspect ratio to work with it. I recommend, I think it was Cam Mackey's video on the Mantis lenses, I think is where he talked about the different aspect ratio D-squeezes between 3x2 and 4x3 in the full frame cameras. That would be a good resource, I'd say, to take a look at, Chris. Let's see here. The 24-105 was slow to focus compared to the 51.8 that I own on an S5 II. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Just saw the difference in AF speed and want to let you know that to check. Honestly, I'm not that surprised, to be fully honest with you. The 24-105 is one of the oldest lenses in the L-mount system from us. That lens came out when the S1 series was launched. The 51.8 is a lens that's within the last, 2.5 years. There have been major changes over the years in focus motors, in designs, for speeding things up to be able to take the full advantage of the newest systems. So to be honest, I'm not surprised that the 24-105 compared to the 51.8 is going to be maybe a little bit slower. You are also working with an f4 lens versus an f1.8. Biggest thing I would just say is make sure your firmwares are all up to date. Make sure your lens firmware is up to date. Make sure your cameras are up to date. But it's one of the things that you'll see. Older lenses, typically, as time goes on, newer lenses are built with newer technologies. They get things that weren't available back in the day. Communication standards may be the same, but sometimes the hardware that you can use to effectively move within the standards, communication-wise, change. So, why does the video format page list all possible combinations of settings rather than letting you choose the format, codec, and frame rate individually? Well, you do have that ability in our cameras. When I come in to look at the rec quality options, if I just press the display button, I can filter out exactly what I want. So if I know I only want to look at all intra codecs, I can do 422 10-bit all I. And these are broken out specifically because these are the ones that we have. We don't mix 422. Like, you don't really need to dig down much further than that. 422 10-bit all I, if I go into here and I hit display, here are all of my options that are 422 10-bit all I that I have access to. Some of these, because either because I'm out over HDMI, I would have to not use internal batteries. I would have to plug in my external power solution on the S1R2. It'll tell me, or in this case, because of dynamic range expansion being turned on. So if I go and I turn that off, go back in, let's change this from 8K. Let's go to 422 10-bit all I. There you go. You can see that I have all of these different options. If I want to filter it even further than that, hey, I only want to be looking at things that are in 4K. Cool, I can come in, look at only things in 4K. I got every aspect, I got every frame rate in all intra that's available in 4K, which would be 422 10-bit all intra, and I can look and choose from here. If I find one that I like, in this case, say I like the 4K 60 frames per second, but I want the 800 megabit per second, which is effectively similar to ProRes LT, I can then go in, hit the Q button, add that to my menu. When I look at the My Rec list, I've got it added. So we do have it. It is in the camera to be able to kind of pick out, what frame rates you want to see, how you want to see them. You just have to press that display button, and then you can go in and filter them. So we answered that one. 4.3 isn't open. The world would literally stop without OpenGate. It's just so good. OpenGate saved my marriage. Good for you. Although I will tell you, it has felt like, over the last, 2 or so weeks, it has felt like some do literally feel that the world would stop without OpenGate. But if the world is going to stop, why not come over to the green grasses of the LUMIX brand? We've got it. We care about you. We listen to you, and we give you OpenGate. Along with all of the other stuff that we give people in the cameras. Or we make available to people in the cameras. Any chance of getting Cinelike A2 on the S5 Mark II? I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the deal is behind Cinelike A2. I don't know if it's something that is easy to implement or if there is something that's kind of required for it to be implemented between the different cameras that we have. So I can double check on that one though. So please add better timecode support to the S5 Mark II. Jam syncing internal timecode could be beneficial. The S5 Mark II doesn't have an ability to take in timecode, so there isn't anything that can be added to that. That system and that camera. So to be clear, there are also certain things like timecode on the S5 Mark II. It was never designed to have it. So it's not going to get it. It's not. We didn't design it with timecode in mind. It doesn't have the port inputs to accept timecode. It uses different Bluetooth hardware than the newer cameras, so it couldn't even do Bluetooth timecode from my understanding. So yeah, S5 Mark II, it's just probably not going to get internal timecode or jamming of timecode. Let's see, where did we go? Luminance spot meter. Okay, there we go. Definitely gonna have to take advantage of some repairs on my cameras. GH7 and S9 had some little issues and always had some awesome experience with Pro Service. Yeah, one of the things that I think maybe isn't really done as often these days, and God, this is gonna make me sound old. I don't think people tend to think about it as much these days. Is actually like, send stuff into a service department to have it checked out and fixed if you think you're having an issue. I'm not saying you, Red. I'm saying kind of in general. The internet is great. Forums are great. Community is great online. However, there are zero replacement for actually having like a technician look at a piece of equipment or a product to know if there's a problem with it or something. These aren't kind of like as easy things to work on as like, in some cases like phones, which are, and I know this is going to sound weird that phones are easier to work on. There's not as big of a pool of troubleshooting that exists in the camera industry as there does for phones or operating system type things like on Android or iOS or Windows or Mac. So yeah, if anyone ever has an issue, like, yeah, definitely check with others, see if they've had an issue. Sometimes it may be something simple, but yeah, if you ever get like weird issues or weird experiences with stuff, definitely always actually try to take advantage of the service and support programs that companies offer you. Some are better than others. Be fully transparent on that. I know everyone at least has one bad experience with a service department somewhere. And the fact of the matter is those are usually the only experiences we ever hear about from service. It's rare that you hear people say, like, Brett was saying, like having a good experience with pro services or anything like that. But I will tell you, statistically, you're going to have a better experience with them than what you typically will read. Typically, in a lot of places. I'm not saying it's a blanket statement across the board for everything. Rhett says, favorite LUMIX or L-mount release this year? S1R2, hands down. That is my favorite product that we have announced in a very long time. I was here and involved in the original S series release. I was still in our Newark office. I was relatively fresh on the job. So being able to see from when the original S1 series was launched and the original S1R, which is still one of my favorite cameras, to what it has evolved to with the S1R2 was probably one of the coolest experiences, especially because I got to be way more involved in the actual launch and the planning of these cameras than I did when we first launched the series. So yeah, the S1R2, hands down, favorite L-mount release this year for me. Favorite event or stream or whatever this year? Ooh. Favorite event? That's a tough one. This has been a weird year. Didn't do as many events as I had done last year, so it's a little bit harder to, kind of nail down on events. Our LUMIX Connect event was pretty dope. That was definitely one of the more fun kind of things I think that we've been able to do, where it's like, hey, we're going to try something new, kind of iterate on it, hopefully be able to do some more of those next year. So that was definitely fun. Obviously the live streams are always fun for me, but yeah, so I'm probably gonna go with the LUMIX Connect event that we did out in LA. I want to say thanks to LUMIX and you especially for connecting with us this year. Also for the Flow app for LUMIX cameras, which were an awesome app. Sure heading in the right direction. Awesome. Yeah, these streams, this whole platform, this ability for just us to be able to chat back and forth, hopefully answer questions, maybe give people some ideas or tips on how to potentially make things easier for yourselves. That's why we built this. That's why I built this. That's why I wanted to have this as a kind of core piece for all of you, all of the existing users, all people that are interested in our brand, people that want to know that you've got support from us. And I think, people like you guys, y'all in the chat, being here, voicing your opinions, voicing the things that you want to see are what have led to the vast majority of stuff that we've added and changed and adjusted in our cameras. Especially over this year with the recent updates on the S1IIs and the S5ii series. The vast majority of that stuff comes from what y'all say in the chat, what you say over on Discord, what you say underneath comments in creators' videos, what you say to us when we're in person at events. It's all, kind of what my initial goal was and vision for what we would build here. We're not the biggest stream, we're not the biggest YouTube channel, by far, but I think that works to an advantage in some cases. It gives all of you more ability, more direct connection to us. And should we get even bigger, which obviously is always a goal, I would love to hit 50,000 subscribers on the channel by January would be a lot. It would be cool to hit 50,000 by January, maybe hit 100,000 by, middle of the summer. That would be awesome. But we're always going to be here doing this for y'all. So, any tips for the S1R2 in low light with lower dual native ISO comparatively with the S1II? The only tip I can really give for low light and ISO performance, don't be afraid of noise in an image. We do run to a, kind of situation, I think, in general in the market where we want hyper clean looking footage, but a lot of times that hyper clean looking footage is, overly noise reduced or plasticky in nature, or it smears colors and things like that. Having grain in video is not a bad thing. If you watch some of your most favorite movies and TV shows, they all have grain. It's never taken away from the story. I typically at that point kind of point more like focus on storytelling, focus on lighting. If you're looking in more narrative, if you're doing wedding and event and things like that, find a style that works best for you. There are always tools that exist to aid in being able to work in low light with modern cameras. The S1II and the S1R2 are some of the better performing cameras in low light as far as ISO goes. Don't just think a clean high ISO makes a better looking image. A lot of times you'll see, fabled cameras in our industry that are known for shooting in pitch black. Cool. They're noise reduced to hell and they're soft and they have no detail in the image. Great. But it's clean. Having texture in an image with maybe a little bit higher ISO, you still have the room to work with in the frames. So my tip, maybe it's not what you want to hear. My tip is maybe don't be as concerned with high ISO or having to kind of worry about ISO in low light. Every camera is going to give you some challenge in those areas, because it's either going to be you have to deal with some noise, which software's gotten really good at being able to kind of help with that, or like I said a little bit earlier, adding film grain and stuff like that can help correct some of those things. In fact, actually, from what I've been told, it looks better on YouTube if you actually add a little bit of film grain, because it boosts it to have to use the higher compression and pay more attention to your export settings. That's one of the things I would recommend. It's a little bit of a tangent to low light with the ISO ranges. Gerald actually did a really good explanation about how he gets his videos to look so crisp on YouTube. If any of this stuff is ever relevant to, hey, I'm working on my piece, but when I put it into YouTube or I put it into this platform, I'm not necessarily happy with how it's looking, go watch his video on that. I'll try to remember or find which video it was and put it down in the description. But he talks about what works for him. It's kind of the same thing here. Don't really worry too much about the ISO values. Obviously you don't want to be shooting 51,000 ISO if you don't have to. There's a difference between low light and no light shooting. Prioritize what's important in the frame for you. Make sure that that's in the right area. And then kind of go from there as far as exposure goes. It's kind of the same principles in photography. Duncan from the UK, how's it going? I'm straight in with a feature request. I have an S5 Mark II X. Can we have the option of the record beep through the headphones? We have had that question before, and I know I've asked Japan, like our engineers, but I don't know if I've ever gotten a response. I will follow up on that one, Duncan. One more request. Can we get a more video-oriented UI for white balance? The whole settings menu looks inherited from photo and does not cut it, in my opinion. Something more streamlined to be better. I can ask. I don't know what people would be asking for. Oh, yeah, Cam Mackey Zaddy with the fresh cut. Yeah, I had to chop it off. Kept the beard though. Gotta keep the beard. Can you suggest better profile for low light videos, Vlog or Cine D or any others? Vlog exposed properly is going to give you the most control. Cine D, like anything outside of Vlog, is going to lock you into pretty much what it is that you shoot. Vlog, when exposed properly, will give you really good performance even in low light. Now again, there is a big difference between low light and no light shooting. No light shooting is in literally I have no light. The environment that I'm in right now, to give you kind of an example, I'll turn this light off. That's how dark my environment is right now. Most of my light is only from the light I have here. So that is considered low. Like this, I would consider this low light shooting because I have to supplement it with something. I expose, and you can see, like, I mean, yes, this is through live streaming, but I'm at 1600 ISO, f1.8, 180 degree. I'm outputting 30 frames per second in this, and I'm actually, according to the meter on the camera, I'm underexposed by 1 1/3 stop. Now, because I'm using UVC into this, I am baking in my vivid color profile from the S1 Mark II. What that means is that, you know, if I needed to edit this and I needed to work with this because this looks good to me, like just as it's shot now, but if I wanted to adjust some of the shadow region over here, or I wanted to bring a little more definition into my beard, I'm not going to get it if I shoot in Cine D or Vivid, or, you know, maybe not even in natural or flat. They're more limited because of what they're designed to capture. Vlog and vgamut have a much wider color gamut. They have more flexibility to adjust your tones. You just have to go back to the beginning of the video or the beginning of the stream when it came to exposing with the tools. Knowing how to expose the footage will mean that you can confidently take Vlog and go capture, and you'll get solid performance out of it. Why do mirrorless cameras? Why don't mirrorless cameras do HDR photos in camera, combining multiple exposure? This has actually come up a lot over the last probably like 2 years. There's two answers I can give here. One of them is, it's going to sound a bit like it's not going to sound like a nice answer. The one answer is why. Single images out of modern cameras produce more dynamic range than's needed to output an HDR look for an image. That's one. And then tied to the fact that cameras only up until recently output 8-bit JPEGs, which weren't enough to actually even show HDR. It was a from an era of hyper-colorized, hyper-exaggerated imagery. The more, I'd say, pertinent answer would be, up until recently, cameras only shot JPEGs, which were like 8-bit JPEGs, or they shot TIFFs in some cases. The challenge is that, you know, HDR, even if you're merging a bunch of RAW files, you would still be having to put them into like an 8-bit container, which can't really show the HDR effect, since HDR is really how bright can my highlights go? Can I get this pinpoint of light to properly show at the right luminance values on a display that I'm trying to, you know, show the image on? Recently, with HEIF and HEIC type file formats being like basically the standard that has been, you know, kind of set on in the image capture world, those options are becoming more available now. Like in the S1II series, you can do HEVC, or not HEVC, HEIF image files in 420 10-bit, which is a standard for that delivery, to give you a proper HDR image. So when I show it on, you know, I look at it on my phone, when I look at it in, say, an Instagram, you know, kind of wall of images, if I display it on an HDR TV, it flags it properly, it's under the right gamut, it provides the right information and flagging so that the display knows what to do with where the highlights are and where your shadow points are. Multi-exposure HDR never really was designed to do that. Early cameras, in-camera HDR was designed to kind of compensate for, we didn't really have the best noise control. Older sensors were much noisier. You needed a way to kind of find a way to clean them up, maybe extend dynamic range a little bit back when cameras kind of needed it to even meet really what you would want out of a full-blown. And they were all based on JPEG. They were all based on a direct out of camera, I want to not have to do much editing to this. Modern cameras, aside from doing a proper what HDR is, because to be clear, I wouldn't even really classify what old cameras called HDR by what we call it today. They were more like what now modern cameras call things like eye dynamic, active, I think Nikon used to call it active D-lighting. I don't know what Sony or Canon call theirs. Modes like that, I think, are more what those HDR modes were trying to do back in the day. So when it comes to our cameras, it's one of the reasons why I've really not ever advised using eye dynamic in our cameras for a long time. Because one, eye dynamic does affect, in some cases, RAW files. because you're shifting how the exposure values are working when you use tools like that, so that the output that is generated for the JPEG or, you know, HEIF in some cases, because you can use it there too. For our case, iDynamic will kind of rebalance out what that exposure is. Lift shadows maybe harder, pull highlights back more aggressively than a standard, you know, JPEG conversion would be. Excuse me. So that's why honestly that's why, like, there really isn't HDR photo in a lot of cameras, and in most cases usually it's redundant with whatever, like, iDynamic, active D range, like whatever companies want to call these, like, extended dynamic range modes. They're not HDR. HDR would be shooting in Rec 2020, in PQ, in HLG, one of those formats that actually maps the colors properly and flags it properly for a digital display in modern era. When using APS-C L-mount lenses like Sigma APS-C lenses, Lumix cameras force you into crop mode. Yes. Is there any chance in the future you can stay in full frame mode with the vignetting? No. That is not necessarily a choice by us. That is a spec on the standard for the L-mount Alliance. Sigma designed those lenses as APS-C lenses. That's how they want them used. That's what their image quality is designed for. It's Sigma's lens. We respect what the mount is designed for in the communication parameters. If the lens tells us that it's an APS-C lens on the mount specification, it needs to be displayed as an APS-C lens. If you have an issue with things like that with an optics manufacturer, you got to talk to the optics manufacturer. It's not us forcing you. We follow what the standard is. And the fact that Leica, Sigma, and Panasonic are all founding members of the L-mount Alliance, we've all agreed to this. It's not going to change. If you want to, like, I understand the obsession with wanting to use APS-C lenses and use the range outside of what it was designed for. I get it. A company is typically never going to really do that because, let's face it, while you may understand what it is that you are asking to do and what the drawbacks may be of vignetting on the lens, the fact that your edges are not going to be anywhere near as sharp as what they're designed for because the design goals of that lens were for the projected region on an APS-C sensor, not a full-frame sensor. The vast majority of people aren't going to be. They're going to complain. They're going to cause problems. They're going to demand returns, refunds. They're going to claim that a product is defective or broken. It's just the reality of what happens because it's not the company's fault at that point. It's using the product outside of what it was designed for. And just because a number of us are, I'd say, knowledgeable enough that we know what those risks are, vast majority of people might not be. And in some cases, that's just how it goes. So if you do want to voice, frustrations or things like that, you would need to go to the optics manufacturer. If it's anything on the L-mount lens, because it's up to what the optics manufacturer is categorizing their lens as on the L-mount system. It's not up to us. We don't get to make that choice. Without trying to step on Hornet's Nest, but is the Bluetooth timecode support by other brands than Atomos? So I looked into this. So someone mentioned the other day that they were like, well, I want to have support for Deity with Bluetooth timecode. I looked into it. Deity doesn't support Bluetooth timecode outside of a very specific product from my understanding. They don't work with cameras. So it is just Atomos. I would have to do more research because Deity is the only one I know that I was asked about. But the UltraSync is the only one that I know that is like actual one does what people are asking it to do and is supported on our cameras. Is this possible? While recording through HDMI like ProRes RAW, can we record MOV or MP4 Lite to SD card or a proxy? Just asking if that's possible or not. On the S1II Series, I think we can do proxies with HDMI RAW. Yeah, so on the... This isn't going to work because it's trying to output a RAW signal. On the S1II series, I can output RAW over HDMI. So like on the S1R2 here, I have this set right now to do 8.1. I have this set to do 8.1K, 3x2, 24 frame RAW over HDMI. I can go to my proxy settings. I can turn proxy settings on, and I can record a 1920 by 1280 3x2 proxy to the SD card in the camera. So if I'm doing 3x2 RAW output, I can do a 3x2 1920 by 1280 proxy to the SD card, which will be 14 megabit per second in 3x2 H.265. So yeah, it does work on the modern camera. So it'll be the same on the S1II and the S1II. When we enable crop zoom, just activate it, not zooming. The image quality is better than without this function. I've heard people say that, but I've also seen info that it doesn't change. I would have to still look into that. I'll ask Japan what's going on with that. I know that crop zoom does have to change the way certain things are done because you're on the fly adjusting or changing the downsampling, the way certain stuff works. But I'll definitely look into it, and then when we get back after the new year, hopefully maybe I'll have an answer. It's a little tough because usually everyone is on a little bit of a vacation, much needed vacations over the holiday season, but I will look into it for you. If I'm in OpenGate and want more reach out of my lens, fine with cropping, what's the fastest way to jump back and forth between full frame OpenGate and a crop version? Does hybrid zoom work in OpenGate? Hybrid zoom and crop zoom will not work in OpenGate because OpenGate in our cameras, or 3x2, is the full sensor height and width pixel to pixel, basically. That means that you have nothing to downsample from. Crop zoom and hybrid zoom rely on the camera being, on the image being a downsampled image. So if I'm in 4K I'm on the S1R2, it's because it's taking 8K. Let me just get this out of RAW so I can go back to the camera. If I'm on the S1R2 and I'm using a 4K image, it's being processed from an 8K image down to 4K. So hybrid zoom has the ability to scale that resolution as I'm adding the crop to it. If you want to be shooting an OpenGate, depending on the camera that you're working with, typically there is the closest would likely be, just double checking here. Yeah, so the closest would be, so here on the S1R2, like right now I'm on 8K OpenGate or 8.1K OpenGate. If I wanted to be doing a Super 35, and I wanted to keep that 3:2 ratio, I'd have to come down to 4.7K, which is going to get me, I mean, it's a 4:3 ratio, but it's coming from the APS-C area. That would get me some of it. I'd have to double check. I don't know if that actually allows me to do, I don't know if that allows me to do the crop zoom, but I can, honestly, it takes me 2 seconds to test that here. No, so even this won't. You'd have to go to one of the kind of non 3:2 or 4:3 ratios. So if I did, in this case, let's do C4K, and then let's do 30p. This should give me, yeah, this gives me crop zoom and hybrid zoom. So you would have to change out of an OpenGate option for that. In your experience, is it preferable to white balance in camera with a dedicated extra white card or an 80% gray card? Both being from X-Rite. Any advantage from one or the other? I've never really run into a big problem using either of them. Usually I'll use gray cards for white balancing. There are tools for the video side of it as well, like video cards to determine, you know, your midtone, highlight, and shadow. White balance is white balance. I would probably use an 18% gray, or something that's designed for white balance. I don't think white balance is one of those things you have to go overboard with, cost-wise. There's benefits to buying, you know, higher quality or bigger brand name tools for it, for sure. But there are also, you know, situations that you just don't necessarily need to spend that much, because you can get a pretty good tool for it that's relatively inexpensive, that, you know, you're not going to be heartbroken if you leave it at a job. Do you have any particular goals with the use of the UI in LUMIX Lab and Flow for the tablet versus phone? Not that I'm aware of, though I'm not always part of those conversations, so yeah. Any planned updates? We don't really have any info or talk about future plans or anything for products, firmware, or hardware. In the S5 Mark I, Mark II, is it possible to use linear focus settings with the Sigma 85 1.4 latest model fly-by-wire lens in order to mimic a manual focus lens? You can, to my knowledge. The catch with some of the Sigma lenses is, one, it depends on the era of the lens, and in order to change the degrees of rotation, it would have to be, you have to do those changes through their dock, not through our camera. Changes that can be done, some of their lenses do have communicate the information needed because the hardware supports it, to allow our camera to say, like, hey, 90, 180, 150, 270, like whatever. Not every lens has that, because it depends on when the lens came out, what hardware the lens is using. But yeah, you should be able to use linear with those lenses. Would it be possible to add or merge the control features from LUMIX Tether to LUMIX Lab in the future? Probably not. LUMIX Tether is designed for a very specific purpose. LUMIX Lab's designed for a very different purpose. Yeah, they're gonna likely remain independent. Please add jam sync option to the S5 II or X when shooting RAW with video assist and wanting to sync with external audio recorders instead of having two time codes to handle. The S5 Mark II and the Mark II X do not have the hardware to support jam syncing timecode, so it's not going to happen. Yeah. S-Series cams. Does the white balance card need to be in focus when custom white balance? No, doesn't need to be in focus. You want to have it fill that whole area, though, and you want to have it as even as you can get. Can we have full frame in 4.7K in the S1R2? It's only crop mode now. S1II has it. So the S1R2 has cropped for 4.7K because it's a frame rate thing, being able to do the different frame rates. Some resolutions are designed in cameras to be able to enable certain frame rate options within the cameras. Also understand that, again, the S1R2 is not designed... I've said this before, the S1R2 is not a video-first camera, so, you know, don't be surprised if it doesn't get every single video thing that's out there. Yes, it's a very competent video camera. I think there's a lot of double talk going on when it comes to, like, us as a brand, where they're like, well, you know, they built a camera and they told us it's a photography camera, but they put a bunch of video features in it. Yeah, we did, because if we didn't put video features in it, you would never review the thing and people wouldn't talk about it at all. The S1R2, it has a lot of video functionality with it. The S1II is still the better video camera. The S1R2 just happens to also be the first 8K camera from us. So 4.7K, it's not going to be, it's going to stay in the crop mode. You're not going to see anything change that way. If you need something like 4:3 aspect ratio in full sensor height, you got to go to an S1II. That's what that camera's for, not the S1R2. Do you know the bitrate and compression used when live streaming from the USB-C port in UVC mode? I don't know the bitrate. I don't know what compression, because UVC, from my understanding, uses a different method than like HDMI or like a traditional bit rates and compressions. I don't have any of that information though. Where did we go? Devil's advocate on the APS-C. Yeah, even if there were warnings, Rhett, it wouldn't change anything. Even with the warnings on the high thermal temp, people still have issues or complaints, and try to blame cameras or the brand for things that we tell them in general. Cam says, what is it about the S1R2 that makes the image so good? Is the 8K cheating extra color fidelity? Is it hardware or something creating the magic sauce? So Cam, it really, a lot of that stuff can come from the sensors. So every sensor that's produced has an inherent characteristic to it. The way it is able to kind of absorb light, right? So think of a pixel as like a well, right? So it's like this. A pixel will have, depending on its design structure. So right now we're looking at half of a pixel, right? Modern or FSI sensors, because there are a couple cameras that still use FSI, means that all the hardware and wiring is actually up here. So light comes in up here. All the hardware and wiring is up here. That means that light has to go through all of that, bounce, then it hits the well, and then it goes into the diode and all that stuff. And then you've got where it gets sent out to the board. Then you have BSI, which takes all of the electronics, moves them back here, so light doesn't have to go through all of that to hit the diode. Now, we're ignoring that you have micro lenses on top. Then you have stacked, which means you've got BSI back here, which is where all of the electronics are. You've got DRAM, or some sort of memory, right here. Then you've got your the pixel area. And what you'll notice is that when you go to BSI, every time you're adding something else to it. So if I add, so again, this is the pixel. If I add BSI, I'm removing that much from the pixel well. If I add partially stacked, I'm removing that much from the pixel well. If I add fully stacked, I remove that much from the pixel well. You notice that well keeps getting shorter and shorter and shorter. That's one of the hardware reasons why partially stacked sensors with no additional capabilities being done perform worse than standard BSI sensors. Now the benefit is that you get faster readouts, so you get better rolling shutter performance. Great. You have cooler different tools, like the fact that we were the first with a full frame camera that in modern era that's doing dynamic range boost. That gives you all the benefits of the dynamic range performance with a much more modern sensor performance, but you do have to give up some of the rolling shutter performance to be able to do it. When you look at the S1R2 versus an S1II, an S1II being a partially stacked sensor, you run into where you've got the BSI stuff, then you've got partially stacked, so your sensor well is down. We have ways to get around that with partially stacked sensors. Now, you look at the S1R2, it only has that one layer, the BSI part. So its wells can be filled with more photons. It can get like richer colors and fidelity to record per pixel. Modern technologies make that easier. The processing that's done, the resolution will help in stuff like that as well. And there is a difference if you've ever shot in like film photography, right? If you go from shooting 35 millimeter film and I go to take a picture and then I go shoot an 8x10 film. This was a cool experience I had back when I was in school. Aside from depth of field, because yes, you're going to have major depth of field differences when you go, 35 millimeter film to a literal 8x10, positive piece of film. Or even negative at that point. Aside from the depth of field differences, there is a major rendering difference there. And maybe you can equate that to resolution differences, that higher resolutions give you just inherently more info to play with, so you get the feeling of more depth. It's a lot of stuff that kind of all goes together. And that sensor that we're using in the S1R2 is a very, very special sensor. I think a lot will agree that that sensor is probably one of the best performing ones that we've produced, that we've used and produced in our series. And now with the recent update, you've got a solid performing camera. Even though I said it's not a video first camera, you still got a solid performing video camera for its uses. All right, I got time for like 2 or 3 more questions, and then I do have to wrap up this end of year. Hi Sean, I love how LUMIX have ramped up, or at least it feels that way, community engagement this year. Challenges, events, plus the live streams were really interesting. Yeah, we have taken some steps to try to really ramp things up, but take what I would call pretty measured steps. Trying to do it right so that we're not, necessarily biting off more than we can chew. Trying to make sure that, we're not doing things that make the long time LUMIX community kind of feel like we're changing too much, or that we're losing some of our kind of grounded I don't say groundedness. I don't even think that's a word, but not adjusting ourselves too much to the point that we lose what those of you have stuck with us for over the decades that we've been around. Things do change. We are, trying to expand to be more of a company that others may be interested in wanting to join, as far as products that we make, and trying to be much more welcoming to other ideas, to creators from all different paths. If you're coming into the LUMIX brand, and if this was the first time you've ever come into one of our live streams, our goal is always that I don't care what camera you shoot. If you happen to shoot ours, that's spectacular. Photography and videography are a community type thing. Yes, there's a lot of selfish things that we can do with photography and videography, or self-fulfilling things. But being able to build a community, build a place where, just because, maybe you don't use the latest and greatest camera, maybe you don't, want to go for, this particular option from us. Maybe you don't even use our cameras, but you want to kind of understand what it is that people are talking about online. Here, the Discord, our social channels, we're trying to foster that's I hate the term safe space. It's a welcoming place regardless of what system you're in. You'll always hopefully learn something from any of our platforms. So throughout 2026, I think one of my goals I think specifically for this platform, for LUMIX Live, is to try to get us up even greater in subscriber base. I know that that's a weird kind of target, but I want to try to do everything we can to get more people to see this, to get more people to understand that, you know, you've got a place where you can come, you can ask questions, you've got the ability to talk directly to a brand. If you have questions about photography and videography in general, whatever it is, you can ask them. We're not gonna turn away a question because, you know, it's not something that's directly related to our products. This industry needs to grow as a whole, and that's what we're trying to do, even over on the Discord as well. Which, by the way, plug for the Discord, link down in the description. Yeah. The only time I use iDynamics when my client needs standard baked-in image. The editors won't do any color grading, so yeah, that's definitely used for it. How often do you use high megapixel photo mode with these cameras, and in what situations do you find it works best? So I use the high resolution shot mode in our cameras for two primary reasons. One, when I'm doing landscape work, I use the S1II for that because I want those 177 megapixels. And then the other is when I'm doing product. If I'm doing any kind of product, or I'm doing thumbnails or images where, you know, I'm not 100% sure how I'm going to want the image looking or cropped, I'll shoot it all high res at that point. I don't use it for street photography. So obviously it's not fast enough for like decent movement. I'll use it for handheld cityscapes, stuff like that. Yeah. Let's take a look and run through some of these later questions. Has Lightroom updated the S1R2 profile to achieve better rendering? I used Lightroom recently, and I don't feel that I have the same problems I had originally when we first launched. So, yeah. Thanks, Art. Please increase the max shutter speed in aperture mode from 1 second to 20 or 30 second shutter speeds to enable Holy Grail Milky Way time-lapse in the S1II. I can ask. I don't think that might be a hardware limitation. Longer shutter speeds in cameras typically rely on how much storage you have in the camera, not memory cards. Would it be possible to have a button, add a marker in and out, just a clip? It's a good idea. Well, I will definitely ask them about being able to add markers for videos. And then, wasn't Leica APS-C T-mount the former L-mount? Do you know if any of those old T lenses work natively on L-mount cameras and still get updates in the L-mount? It's a good question, Art. So, yes, the L-mount was originally called the Leica T-mount. It was actually a really, really interesting camera. It was the first of the whole idea of we're going to mill it out of a single block of aluminum and we're going to hand polish and all this stuff. So, like, the BF gets a lot of credit for that in the modern era. Props for, you know, modern design in that. But Leica had done that, like, over a decade ago with the Leica T. It's amazing how we forget that some of these things have been done before and we get all excited about them now, but they were done a decade ago by a modern company still. But yes, the Leica T lenses, last I understood, they have received updates that do allow them to work on the modern L-mount cameras. However, they're not going to have... I don't think those lenses get continued updates past wherever they currently are in their kind of update status. You would likely have to check... specifically when it comes to the Leica T lenses, you would have to check with Leica and realistically just go to their service or their support pages or the product pages and look for the firmware updates. they're pretty good at giving an indication of like, this is available, this is where the update is, this is what was changed in it. But just remember, those are going to be APS-C lenses. They're going to force the camera into an APS-C crop because the Leica T-mount was never designed as a full frame. For what it was not a full frame camera. Cool. With that, I do have to wrap this week's stream up, this year's stream up. So, thank you, everybody. Thank you, all of you who have hung out, who have asked some amazing questions throughout the year, who've joined us through the product launches, joined us through firmware releases, our just chatting conversations, our ramblings, who've taken the leap and joined us over on Discord. I still encourage you, if you're not already, go check us out on Discord. The conversations are definitely fun. If you're someone who always viewed Discord as just like, the video gaming kind of platform where you can chat with your friends or you can have those conversations, it is so much more than that. So yeah, I greatly encourage you to go check out Discord. Yeah, it's the end of the year. We've got Christmas and the holidays coming up. We got New Year's. I guess my message to everybody, to all of our followers, to all of our users, even those of you that don't use our products, I hope you all have a great rest of your year. I hope you go out there, you create awesome stuff. Don't be afraid to share the awesome stuff that you create. Get involved in the communities. Get involved, whether you're involved in the LUMIX community or you use LUMIX equipment. Join us in our communities. If you don't use our equipment or you're not into the LUMIX cameras, but you're still interested in photography, still join the communities. There's so much information that can be shared and learned from each other. And it's all, it doesn't all always have to be about products and hardware. We will be back at the beginning of the new year. So our next stream is actually going to be on January 2nd. It's going to be on a Friday, since New Year's Day is on the 1st. So we will be back on the 2nd, so that's a little over 2 weeks from now. Yeah, just getting right back to it, into the new year. If you have topics or ideas for things you want to see us do in 2026, let us know in the comments below the video. If you have topics that you want to see me cover that maybe are going to take a little bit of research and time, let me know. We'll try to work on it and be able to, even if it's got to be a semi-recorded stream to really be able to dig into topics. I would love to do more of those this year. Maybe we'll be able to do in-person LUMIX live streams next year. That's one of the other things I want to try to advance into. But other than that, that's kind of what I got for y'all today. Again, have a great new year. Have a safe new year. Have a great holiday, whatever holiday you celebrate. Spend time with friends, family. Get out there with your cameras. Go take some cool pictures. Create some cool videos. Share them all over the place. Let people know what you do. Yeah. I will see everybody in the new year. Later.